Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. You're watching Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Kanni Wignaraja of Sri Lanka. She is the Assistant Secretary General for UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. She's also the Director of its Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. Now, as you may know, the UNDP is tasked with helping countries to eliminate poverty and exclusion through sustainable economic growth and human development. Kanni, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I know you have a very busy schedule here while you're in Malaysia for, I think it's a week-long mission here, during which I understand you will be meeting with government leaders and industry leaders. I would like to begin our conversation today by asking what you believe to be Malaysia's most pressing concerns when it comes to sustainable development.
Lovely to join you, Melissa, and to be back here in Malaysia. I think a couple of the big issues that have come up already in just the 2 days here and the chance to speak with leadership, both in government but also in non-government circles and with business. I think the worry was that there was a hold or a suspension of the advancement and progress towards a number of the sustainable development goals that Malaysia was really purposefully moving forward on. So I think the issues of really looking at tackling hard poverty. Malaysia has been very good at overall at reducing its poverty rate. But there's always stubborn poverty that then you have COVID come along and it slows down the pace in which poverty was reducing. There's always also a concern that economic growth can continue to rebound, but is that happening with social justice, with equality, and is every Malaysian responding and being able to access that prosperity at the same level? And then obviously the big issue that the world is facing, but which really has a impact here in this eco-rich zone that is Malaysia, is issues that affect biodiversity, that issues of forestry, of how you protect your forest cover, of your marine ecology, and the overall shocks of climate change that are causing disasters. So you bring it all together, and it is a country that has to look at these challenges not one by one, but how they take them on all together.
All right. Everything you're saying resonates with me because, the world sort of emerged from 2 years of a pandemic and then went straight into war. So we've got this, not just the triple threat of COVID conflict and the climate crisis, now it's kind of culminated into a cost of living crisis. And you talked about hard poverty, and I think not just the suspension of efforts to deal with hard poverty, but so many people, so many households have now been pushed into poverty or at the risk of being pushed into poverty. Can we talk a little bit about these colliding crises? Because I do think that it is this interconnected crises will be the new normal. We will have to deal with the climate crisis simultaneously with pandemics, with man-made crises and natural disasters. How best to think about policymakers and also civil society to think about these interconnectedness of crises and not to deal with them in a piecemeal basis?
I think, you're very right to call it a cost of living crisis. And if you think about it that way, who is hit the hardest? It's always those at the bottom of that income chain, but not just income chain. And this is where a number of my dialogues here have involved discussing issues around poverty and inequality as multidimensional. So it's not just an income threat, but it is what is happening to the fact that health systems have been hit. Access to education is hit. Food security is now an issue. Look at the conversation around energy security, and just people's access to power. I mean, energy power, also their access to governance power. But I think the fact that all of this collides, and they meet in the most vulnerable household. That is what we mustn't forget. You see, we get taken up with a lot of the numbers, and we often look at global averages, we look at national averages. But if you unpack it, it all of it falls on the most marginalized, forgotten, most vulnerable community and household. And in the middle of that household often will be standing a woman. And it's on her shoulders that a lot of this falls. So a sense of family security and household security really is carried by poorest women in the country. And so this is why I always say, if there is any fiscal space, the choice is to put that money as an investment in making sure that men and women, but particularly girls and women, have a chance at a full education, a healthy life, at job security, and can make the choices that make for a truly prosperous life they can live with dignity, because they will share that with their families and their communities.
Definitely true. Women are multidimensionally poor, more multidimensionally poor compared to men. I mean, if you look at in terms of education, transportation, income, home ownership, almost every facet you can quantify. I do want to ask you though, when we talk about measuring poverty in all its many dimensions, how might that change the way we respond to poverty by using a multi-dimensional poverty index? I understand Malaysia does not is not one of the countries that subscribes to this metric. How might Malaysia seek to improve so that all the different dimensions of poverty are taken into consideration when we think about the inequalities in society?
You know, that's an excellent question, because for too long we have used just the income measure. And it has been a rigorous measure, but it is singularly defined in that one way. And yet, when you ask people what hurts them most, income is yes, it's in the top 5, but it's never the topmost issue. They will speak to their family's health and their health. They will speak to issues of security. They will speak to issues of justice and access and information. They will speak to education and to shelter. So there's a whole set of issues around which that multidimensionality must be captured and then used. And I would say this conversation is thriving now in Malaysia. There are reasons why Malaysia has not been able to yet adopt the MPI, the Multi-Poverty Index, because it does require that there is a single index, a single data set from which one can take this source, this information, and then provide the policies behind it. This will happen. I am very hopeful and very optimistic, and so is my team. We're working very closely as UNDP with the ministry to make sure that this is something that is moved forward. For the moment, we draw from different data sets, and there's very rich data at the national level, from household surveys to the demographic health and household surveys. So you've got sector data, you've got national data. Now it's about disaggregating it having it available at a very local level, and then bringing it all together as a
Right.
single data set in order to really measure and track multidimensionality of poverty.
Well, that sounds like a mammoth task to do, of accurately measuring poverty in all its dimensions. I'm sure, all kinds of poverty targeting suffers from errors of admission and exclusion. But because of your work with the UNDP, what is it you think we can learn from countries or places that have used multidimensional poverty indices to successfully reduce poverty?
The government has already subscribed to this. It's just a matter, it is a task. I wouldn't say mammoth. I think, I was at the Innovation Summit this morning with the Prime Minister, and I was amazed. I mean, it blew my mind seeing some of the things that have been invented in this country. So my sense is that, you know, um, really coming up with a nationally determined MPI is not going to be a stretch. It will take some hard work, but that is something this country is used to. But here's the issue: it will help to target a lot of national programs and local programs better. Right? That is the key. And this is also key to have what I would call a standing social protection mechanism, not one that is only triggered when there is a crisis, but a sense that it's an investment in a population, in a people. And that to do that, you have to know who exactly in your communities are suffering from these various forms of deprivations, so that one can put a life cycle of support behind that. But it's very proactive, progressive support, and it allows people to move up what I would call not just the income strata, but a strata of well-being that is for them and their families, that holds them there. So even when a shock hits, heaven forbid we have another COVID, but let's say a climate shock or another pandemic, they're able to hold because they've got that capability and that support behind them.
Is this also part of the UNDP has been championing the temporary basic income? Is this part of that social safety net to make sure that in the event of those shocks, there's something to catch the poor and the near poor?
Absolutely. We've been arguing for this for a long while, and suddenly, this is with COVID, it suddenly came up again as something that countries must consider. And a number did, both North and South, by the way, realized that suddenly you have a large number of people, particularly those in the informal sector, who are out of work and on the street. But you also had formal sector workers who could not switch to online work right away, right? And they lost income. So a temporary basic income bridges these moments of shock. But it also helps, again, I see it not as a cost to a budget, but as an investment. It's a choice that countries make, right? So to me, the fact that you provide a cash bridge, now in some countries it was provided with conditions, right? So you did have to continue to search for work. Other countries over time have provided a basic income with the guarantee that all your children must have their immunizations, that they've got to go to school, you've got to enroll them in school, you've got to be looking for work. So there are different, what I would call social guarantees that come with it. But to me, the point is that I've always felt people know what to do with the cash in hand when the going gets tough. And they make the right choices for themselves and their families, particularly if you put that money in the hands of women. They know what to do for them and their families. So for me, I feel that it's an absolute must have. It must be combined with other forms of support that is provided. And this is not just a responsibility of the state, it is a responsibility of employers, and it is an individual's responsibility to make sure that there's rights and obligations. It's part of a social contract.
Understood. Kanni, we're going to take a quick break, but let's come back and continue this conversation. Still so much to cover. We will be back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned to Consider This. Hi, thanks for staying with Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. Let's continue our conversation with Kanni Wignaraja, UNDP's Assistant Secretary General, also the Director of its Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. She's a global leader on sustainable development, climate resilience, economic growth and equality for the vulnerable. She's in town for a week-long mission, including being part of the Malaysia Innovate Summit 2022. Kanni, I want to ask you about that because you were quoted as saying that innovation for development is about empowering all levels of society to tackle the most pertinent issues in their communities with breakthrough ideas. And I really love that. I do want to ask you, in your work, what some of the commonalities are with those who have been able to innovate for development. It's so important now, particularly for sustainable development, but what is it that you're observing within communities, the common thread that ties them?
Well, the common thread is human curiosity and ingenuity. It always blows my mind that no matter where I go and folks I talk to, it could be urban, rural, across income strata, across professional fields, sometimes in the remotest communities. My goodness, the capacity to dream and to be able to come up, to invent, to come up with ideas that are local solutions. So when you have that, then to me the responsibility of all of us, national and international, is to provide that ecosystem to support this. Because you could have 100 individuals with bright ideas, and where do they go from there? So how do you support the startups? How do you connect them to each other? Are your learning systems and education systems open to innovators, to those who are almost rebellious in their ideas and shake the system? I mean, young people, in every country, my goodness, thank goodness that they really, and it's also those young at heart. It's not just an age issue. They should shake it up as well. But it's about the investment in research and development. It's the public space to debate ideas. It's the ability to have a entrepreneurial system which allows you to fail. You don't. These are issues that make up that ecosystem, and if you don't have that, politically, economically, socially, culturally, it's absolutely that then misses all of this. And the vibrance comes from the fact that you can connect modern with traditional. You can connect social cues with digital technology. You can connect institutional behavior with individual choice. This is, for me, what innovation is about. It's not just about tech. It's way beyond that. But tech just gives it that push and that drive. And this is a country that really can show the world that larger ecosystem of innovation can thrive.
Can innovation at the community level be scaled to the point where it makes a national impact? Have you seen
Absolutely.
success stories?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, if I just think about a few things, the whole issue of renewables. Just think of renewable energy, right? These started in someone's backyard, in a garage. I mean, sun, wind technology. Look at hydrogen. I mean, these were all sandbox ideas. And today, the world will be saved on the energy side because some of these people had the crazy idea that we could control the wind and bring in the sun and convert these to very usable forms of energy. So there are a lot of examples like that. Just look at transportation today, right? And the fact that you have public transport, buses, trains that run on electricity, that run on LGE. Now you're looking at look at the new forms of transport. You have Grab here in Malaysia. So it's not only the tech, it's the whole business processes that are around it. You start small, you dare to even to fail, and then you need investors, and this is the key thing. You need investors who pick up these ideas, and as investment comes in, they bear the risk of saying, okay, these, we could scale them, they could be a success, they could fail, and we will bear the loss. And I think both state and private sector have a role to play in this.
Right.
Just look at our mRNA vaccine. That wouldn't have happened if a few scientists, I mean, we've been working with mRNA vaccines for a long time. No one thought we would need it or that it needed to be scaled. It has probably saved half the planet.
Definitely in changing the world, changing it at that level, at the world level. Can I ask you also, you touched a little bit about budgeting and financing, and it's got me thinking about the multiple crises that we find ourselves in. Many countries, developing countries, Malaysia included, we find our national budgets and our finances stretched thin, almost to the breaking point. And more often than not, that leaves us unable or maybe reluctant to invest in green recovery, in climate change adaptation, all of the things required to achieve the SDGs. How do developing countries overcome that in particular? I mean, it is a very real problem, and part of this, I guess, suspension of progress that you mentioned at the start of our conversation.
I would first say that it's not a matter of money. The cash is there. And it's a matter of choice, of priorities, and where that money goes, and what are the incentives to have the money flow into these areas. So that's the first point, is I hope that parliaments, that state executive sector, that the private sector look at it. It's not a cash issue. My goodness, there is a lot of cash sloshing around out there. You have to follow and push that cash into these priority areas. The second thing I would say is that it actually makes a lot of economic sense to follow a green trajectory. It's in a number of countries now, you can see the marginal rate of return growing in a lot of green industry and green sectors. It's creating more jobs. So there are countries, and I'm talking big countries, like India and China, that are showing that there is actually new jobs being created at a faster rate and pace in the green recovery areas. So even for those who want purely the economics about it, I would say look again at those numbers. And I would say put your money there, because these are the big returns that are going to come through strong.
Kanni, thank you so much for speaking with me today. That was Kanni Wignaraja, UNDP's Assistant Secretary General and also Director of its Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.